All right. So now that we've talked about the main portions of the heart, the types of vessels that our blood is moving through, and a little bit about the characteristics of the blood, we can now talk about the specific cells in our blood. So we've talked about the liquid portion of the blood, remember blood plasma, and now we're talking about the cellular component of our blood. And so the main cell that's in the blood, or there are two types of main cells actually in our blood. The most abundant cell in the human body, there are about 30 trillion of these in each of your bodies right now, and this includes 70% of all the cells in your body. So every type of cell, 70% of them are made up of red blood cells. Now, these cells' primary function is to transport oxygen to all areas of the body. They're able to do this because they're filled with a protein called hemoglobin that binds specifically to oxygen. They have a very characteristic shape that we can see over to the right side, that of a biconcave disc. Kind of looks like a donut with a little indentation in the center. They're shaped this way for a very specific reason. Now, the structure of the red blood cell is extremely strong and flexible. These cells need to be very strong and flexible because they need to squeeze into very tight capillaries to deliver oxygen and other nutrients to all areas of the body. These cells are produced in the bone marrow and generally last about 120 days, and then they're signaled for deletion in the liver and spleen, which function to filter our blood for old and dying red blood cells. Another very important type of cell flowing in our blood is the white blood cells. Another name for the white blood cells are leukocytes. We'll learn a lot more about white blood cells and leukocytes and the different types when we talk about the immune system in a few weeks, but for now, I just want us to be aware that they are carried in the blood. They're much less common than red blood cells, but they do serve a very important function, and that is protecting us from all the pathogens that try to get in and invade our bodies. These cells are also produced in the bone marrow. As I mentioned, there are a number of different types of white blood cells, and depending on its type and specific function, it can live for a matter of days, a number of months, or even a number of years, depending on the cell's specific function. And all these cells work to coordinate our immune response to specific types of infection in our bodies and fight what are called pathogens or microorganisms that can cause specific types of disease. Now, when we actually do get sick or are actively fighting an infection, our body signals to increase the number of these cells to fight the pathogen. You may have had an infection or a cut or something like that got infected, and your body started producing what you would call pus. So this pus is basically a buildup of dead white blood cells at the site of the infection. And it's telling us that our body is actively trying to fight an infection. Another important component or function of our circulatory system and red blood cells are these things called platelets. Now, platelets are largely responsible for our blood actually clotting or stopping the flow of blood when we get a cut or a scrape. Now, generally how clotting works is that when one of our blood vessels gets damaged, so for example, you can see in our figure here, so we have our blood vessel gets broken, our body sends messages that causes platelets to rush to the site of the damage. So these platelets are labeled here that you can see. So it rushes to the broken blood vessel wall. When platelets actually get to the site of the injury, they release a specific type of protein that's called fibrin that helps them stick to one another. So it makes them very sticky. So they also send out additional signals to recruit more platelets to that specific area. The additional platelets then kind of pile on in this process called aggregation to produce this blood clot with activated platelets and that sticky fibrin protein. Now, clotting is a wonderful illustration of something we've talked about previously. If we remember back to our very first lecture, this idea of the body remaining in homeostasis, right? So keeping the body in a specific type of balance. So if we have too many platelets, for example, in our blood, the body could form clots when clots aren't actually needed. But if we have too few platelets, that's when we actually see bleeding types of disorders where we might not be able to stop the bleeding even for something like a minor cut. And so now, oops.